Starting the recording now. So welcome everybody. At the beginning of the year, our 2024 outcomes, our OKRs that we worked on with Brian and Trevor, really centered around helping Epsilon mature its agility, specifically in the space of predictable delivery. Predictable delivery doesn't mean that it is a predictable journey to the delivery. It means that we have predictable behaviors and that we can predict likely target dates. So we started on a journey because it sounds, like, oh, we could just, put a plan together and make that happen. But with agility, we really work with live data. We work with feedback. And as we get data and feedback, we make changes and we welcome change. So when we think about, oh, I want to deliver something on time, whatever that looks like for you, whether you've created the date as a team or whether somebody's given you a date you have to meet, how do you manage that and still welcome change? So that's some of what we're going to explore today. In addition, what we wanted to see is some consistent behavior around how we're using epics. And we're going to get into all of that today so that we can have some centralized reporting and some data that we can use at the Epsilon level, at the C-suite level, in order to make decisions. So the Epic, within all the variety of our tools and the way that teams are working, the Epic becomes a container that is constant across all of those things. When we look at working through epics and release forecasting, it actually doesn't affect anything that you're doing at your team level. If you're using Scrum, if you're using Kanban, if you're Waterfall, if you're Agile Project, if you're a client team, that all is going to be okay when we look at these two practices that we're starting to socialize and work on. When we talk about it, our process, sort of our planning process, the two areas that it really affects are when we know there's something we're going to work on, it's a known thing, it's coming in. Typically for us in product engineering, it's quarterly. In other teams, it can be sooner than that or bigger than that. But for us, typically it comes in quarterly. It's a known thing. Product has decided we are going to do this. So it doesn't have much to do with discovery about saying, do our clients want this? How do we want to do this in the market? It really is, this is a known thing and we're going to work on this. But they're big and they can cross multiple teams. And as you all have experienced, I'm sure there's a lot of dependencies in there. So because the Epic can cross teams, it's a good container for us to use to centralize some of our behaviors around. And because our tools can give us a reporting off of epics, it can help us in this march to predictable delivery. So those are the two areas in our planning process where this conversation touches today. What questions does this have in terms of why we're here and what we're doing today? When you think about the Agile Planning Onion, we're here. We do use a lot of Scrum language, even if you're not using Scrum, make the adaptions, or if you're using something else. But basically where we're staying is above what's happening at the team level, right? We're staying in this, I call this the connective tissue. It's that space between business management and product management and delivery management. Typically there can be a vacuum there. If we don't fill it, it will get filled. If we don't fill it with what we want, it will get filled. And it often gets filled then bottom up. And that becomes a lot of technology leads or tech leads or developers, doing good stuff, trying to fill that vacuum with what they believe is the right thing to do. But it doesn't always end up being the right thing to do. It doesn't mean it's bad stuff. It just means that it might not always be completely connected to strategy. And that's our real goal today, is to work through those things to see how we can make that connective tissue work given the spaces that everybody's working in. I am under no illusion that it's going to be a cut and paste for everyone. So on this call, in addition to product owners, we have our coaches and our Scrum Masters. We've been working for a year to work on all of the elements of these things so that when we got to this point where we're introducing some of these things or these things are new, you're going to have support. If you are a person who doesn't have a Scrum Master on your team, we have coaches who are able to work across multiple teams, and we want to make sure that you are aware that you will have the support. So this is a socialization period. We're educating, we're training, but we're not going to send you out there and say, go do this without giving you as much support as you need. So our goal was to socialize and do this training, now by the end of the year, getting this communication going, knowing that there's all of these different elements in play that are going to have to be adjusted. Now, if you consider that it took us about a year as Agilists to refine and align, I think it's going to probably take a year in the bigger Epsilon world to start using some of these things. So there's no big deadline in the sky. There's no release forecasting metric that you're going to have to meet. It's a valuable practice that's going to help us become better and mature our agility over time. When you see this chart, you'll see kind of what this affects. There are many, many elements that this affects. That's how complex this is. And we're going to stay a lot in this epic and release forecasting side, but it touches on how you're managing your product backlog items. It touches on sprint reports or team reports because there's so many different threads of all of this coming together. What questions does this prompt?
So the focus is really, we've got the roadmap, the prioritization has been done ahead of time, and this is for us to be able to determine what will or won't fit in the quarter and to be able to track the status of it. Is that correct?
Well done. I'm glad we're recording this.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, yeah. Now, I will say that in terms of priority, the big bets or a client asks, those priorities are set, but we still within the teams believe that there's probably a lot of sequencing and prioritization that has to happen at the epic level.
Okay.
So we're there might be an idea of what that priority looks like, but once you start getting into the product engineering side of those asks or the data engineering side of those asks, then there's probably going to be more prioritization and sequencing that has to happen when you get into the solutioning.
Okay.
All right, nice summary. Thank you for that. All right, so our big reasons too that we're using some of this is that it helps us in that reporting to make better investment decisions. So we just want to take a minute to level set on the terminology. If you're not using epics now, we think of epics as a container for work. Think of it as a big container for work. Typically in Agile taxonomy, you'll see a next level down, a hierarchy of features, which are typically subsets of epics. Many features make up an epic, just like these boulders make up a bigger mountain. Jira doesn't explicitly manage the backlog with features. One of the ways that you will be able to manage for features is by using versions in Jira. It actually does that very well. And it does do the next level down, the product backlog items, which most people around here would call user stories. I just want to make sure that in terms of technology or in terms of terminology, when we talk about product backlog items, it could be user stories, it could be defects, it could be technical engineering stuff, right? It's those smaller chunks, those smaller rocks that make up, bigger, maybe short releases, and then the bigger milestone of the epic. Any questions on terminology?
Yeah, so sorry.
No, I like it. Please.
We're using initiatives with child capabilities, and then underneath that epics, and then within that task stories and defects. And
Yeah.
so capability is kind of where we've been around, like almost a feature. And then because we've got teams with different projects, teams that contribute to that will have epics that are under that capability. So
yeah. So again, not wanting to cut and paste everything,
yeah.
we will work with you. We'll help
Okay,
you make
great.
that transition. The most important thing where you guys might be using it, a lot of teams are using initiatives or themes or capabilities. You can continue to use those, but we
Okay,
want
great.
you to use epics consistently. So you
Okay.
can do those additional things, but where we need that consistent practice through product engineering and data engineering is around how we're going to use epics for release forecasting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Julie, I think one thing to note, and maybe this is specific to the DCDP and Foundations team, there are, I think, 7 or 8
Yeah.
component teams, and we're all following what Kim just
Yeah.
described.
Well, we
And that
have
was the way
probably
PMO
100
had
teams.
originally set it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have probably 100 teams across Epsilon. That's why it's taken us a year to socialize and get our stuff together. But this is something that both Brian Trevor and Jeff White have helped support and helped with the change management communication and have this expectation. So again, we will work with you. We know that it's not going to be a cut and paste, but we do want you to think about, as we use this small workshop, think about, we'll work with you as coaches outside of this to problem solve, but think about what that will look like, because we need that epic behavior to be consistent across Epsilon.
Oh, that's fine.
Hey, Julie, can you hear us? We're in a conference room.
Yes. Hi. Thanks. Go ahead.
So we have a question. This is Amy Moore. So as far as features, you say use versions. We already use versions for our releases for a different purpose, much bigger than just a single feature. So how do we do that?
Yeah, we're not going to get into a lot of the hows. That's where your coaches and your scrum masters are going to be able to get with you, because each of you are using things in different ways. So, we're not just dictating how you use features or versions. What we're asking for is the centralized behavior around epics. It's the epics that we care about. We care that we have consistent behavior around the epics. So it affects a lot of stuff. So remember, it's not going to be a cut and paste. That's why the scrum masters who've already been through all this are on these calls, because we're going to have to go into each of your spaces and help you problem solve with the least disruption possible. Right now, there's no deadline. There's nobody saying you have to do this by the end of the quarter, but as you introduce new things, as you move into 2024, we do want to set the expectation that you're going to meet these data points that we need for those epics and the release forecasting. So it will be a transition, and I will not be surprised if it takes many months to get there. But we're going to continue to work on it, just like we would with any upskilling, right? There's going to be small progresses. There's going to be some figuring out tools and technology, and then we're kind of all marching towards that same destination around the epic data points. All right, so I hope that's not disappointing that we won't problem solve on this call today. We're opening it up, we're socializing it with the caveat that we will coach, we'll help problem solve, and we will do it in a logical way so that it's not it's not disruptive, right? You want to keep going forward. So it's going to be a slow change. Hopefully it's not Chinese water torture, but it is going to be a constant drip of change over this next year. Any questions, comments on any of that? Good questions.
Julie, I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is Paramita. So in our current project, so we are not working on features. So instead we have epics, and we break those epics into tickets or user stories. So no way we are tracking features, but then in our scenario, the epic itself is deemed as a feature. So it would mean that all the user stories which are, say, within a particular epic, if those gets completed and the epic consequently gets completed, so that means the feature itself is ready to be shipped. So is that an okay practice, or is that an acceptable practice?
I think, Paramita, again, like the other teams, we're going to have to take a look individually at what you're doing, and this workshop will help you understand our expectations. So you might have to make some changes. That's why we're doing this. This is a change management exercise, right? We're starting with the socialization, we're laying out the expectations, we're providing training and support, because it's not going to be like, oh, take this and do these exact steps. It's going to be different for each group and each team. And we need that time with our coaches to help figure out what that looks like, right? And if, there's some things that are not going to fit, we've got to come back. But there's no way for us to know that, because each group of Epsilon has been doing things differently. And that's where we're asking is, when we look at the epics, we're asking for consistent behavior around the epics and the release forecasting. That's the purpose of this this training, is to introduce these new expectations. So it is going to require changes, because that's where we want that consistency, is around the epics.
Sure.
Really, so Paramita, I think we can work together with Vinod and Diana.
Thank you.
During our EI time and figure this out. That's okay.
Yeah.
Yep,
Sure,
thanks.
Ranjit. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about epics. Epics help frame that problem and the solution, and it aligns people because we're using them in a consistent behavior. As we move into more and more platform development, we have more and more dependencies, and that's not going to go away. If you have a nice clean value stream like loyalty or messenger customer, you might have less dependencies. But many of these other teams that are involved with handoffs to other teams are going to have a lot of dependencies, and epics can cross teams, and we can get the reports and the data out of there that we need for Vidya, Brian, Trevor, and Jeff to help make investment decisions. So that's the biggest purpose, is alignment around that tracking and reporting, both early on what we're doing and how we're doing it. Who gets involved? We want a cross-functional team. In addition to, if you are a product owner, we want people who are also involved in that solution. If it's your tech lead or your solution lead, your architect, they need to be involved. Probably a product manager is going to be there to help make sure that that traceability down from the big bet or the client ask would be there if you've got a business stakeholder. So this is definitely a group of leaders, people who can make decisions that should be in the room. Of your project managers, if you've got them, if you've got scrum masters or agile coaches, they're also helpful because we're looking again for that connective tissue. This is typically not an area where we need to have the development teams yet. You might use, you're going to take the output from these sessions and then move them, move them into your development teams. But we typically look at a high level, integration team made up of people who are involved in your work. Questions on the who? All right, and I would err on the side of inclusion until you, figure out your patterns, because some people might have a much more technical or infrastructure type of, initiative, and some people may have something that's leaning more towards product. So we're not naming names, we're not naming roles. We're saying who's positioned best to make these decisions around, these big chunks of work and this sequencing. I think we talked about this. It's really, the purpose is to make better investments and to also take a look at what is realistic for the quarter. I think Kim said it very, very well in the beginning. And then we're also using them at that C-level suite to assess where effort was spent. We're reporting these metrics go up to Myron, Brian, Jeff White, and we look at, and Rick Ehlert, and they look at the epic data points. So we've been practicing that in beta and showing those things. And so we're ready to now do this bigger socialization. When we do it, again, we fit it in, after product has come with their ideas or a big bet from a client, or maybe you have some internal technology or infrastructure project, it's a known thing, before it gets introduced to the teams, so that you can shape and refine those expectations and those benefits. And we do that typically in a workshop with this integration team. As a product owner, you're probably going to want to come to that workshop very prepared. So we have a lot of aids to help you. If you come back to your learning resources that I introduced and you come down in here, you're going to see on this right side all of these aids that we have to help you with this information. And again, also, in addition to these written aids and some videos, our Scrum Masters and coaches have been working on this for quite some time. So you're going to have that physical support too as you translate it into your team. And this is what it would look like. This is in our beta test. This is something that I pulled from, I think, AMS or activation. We're looking for these 3 different business values: revenue, efficiency, and strategic. Whoops, I don't know why it keeps moving. And then we're looking to have an idea of really clear problem statement, what the expected outcome is. The dashboards go on, it shows the expected quarter, and if it doesn't meet that expected quarter, maybe a little bit of why. That is so leaders can start to understand where those dependencies are happening at the high level, and then they can work, because many times dependencies are going to be happening outside of data engineering or product engineering, and we want our leaderships to help involve to get to that nice flow across teams, what Brian Trevor has termed end-to-end delivery, right? We want to remove friction points to get more of this end-to-end delivery. And in order to do that, we need the metrics. So we're looking at this from both an investment purpose and a tracking assessment purpose. And then the last thing I want to show before we go to our mural is that we are using them also in those pockets of nested teams or systems where we have a lot of teams. For example, in the activation workflow, we have something like 14 teams involved, and I think 6 or 7 teams are actively involved right now in the activation workflow. That includes AMS, there's some digital CDP, there's some Disco Pro, there's even some SVG from data. The portfolio sync gives us that ability to look at those epics. Remember, we're keeping strategic people at a strategic level. We don't want them diving into the user stories and into the team backlogs. We want them solving problems and aligning at this epic level. The portfolio sync, especially this in Jira, works really well to show how those epics are moving across different phases. And you can drill down into live data. So you don't have to have a status meeting. You can have a very active problem-solving meeting to align on dependencies and any friction points, any resource issues, any conflicts that are getting in the way that are keeping things from moving forward. So it shifts the conversation when we're looking at things at a portfolio level, and we're keeping people to stay at that epic level. Again, it's that integration team, those leaders that are coming here from multiple teams, because epics will work across teams, and we can use, most of my conversation is going to be around Jira, but obviously this can be done in DSTS. You can see that view, and you can measure the progress across each phase and measure cycle time. When we start to get into a little bit further in the demos, you're going to see some of that as well. Questions on this? All right. And let's go now to our epic, or I mean to our mural. And let me know if anybody needs the
Julie,
link again.
I had an unrelated question to the material, but really more a question about the socialization of these concepts. Have they already been discussed with like the PMO office? Are they aware of these changes?
They're part of all of this, right?
Okay.
They're part of all the same communication that's been going out. We've been using Connect, we've been using the newsletters, we've been using Jeff's and Brian's conversation. So it's very, very new. But anytime any of you that can help socialize, we would really love that. We have found that we try to hit every communication channel we can, and there's still people who are like, oh, I've never heard of that. So we need everybody to help us to start to socialize this.
Okay. I only mention it because, you know, Kim's comment earlier and my concern as well is that I'm not hearing that from the PMs that I know that we're working with on foundations and DCDP.
And they wouldn't know.
They're going to need to know. Yeah.
They wouldn't know yet because this is the introduction.
Yeah.
Right. So we have 3 trainings lined up. We can do more. We're going to continue to do the communication. We are in that socialization period of the change management. We need everybody's help to help socialize this.
Okay.
Thanks for that ask. It's a good question. And just to know that, yeah, this is it. This is new. There's a lot of people that haven't heard about this, despite all of the communications that we've been sending out for the last 6 weeks. So we'll just keep doing it. We'll keep communicating. We'll keep supporting. We'll keep putting out trainings.
Yeah, Julie, can I chime in really quick?
Yes, please.
I've been working actively with Crystal Anderson's team over the past 2 weeks, bringing them up to speed on this. But I've been working with Sanjay, Donna, Steph Epstein, and a few others to start to teach them this stuff and help implement it with them. So they will get up to speed soon.
Okay. Thanks, thank you, Daniel.
We wanted to make sure that before we introduce this to the wider Epsilon, that we had worked on it. We have some beta examples. You know, we've been working with, you know, Vidya and Brian on some of the metrics that are coming out of there, Jeff White. So we wanted to do some beta tests. We've gone as far as we can where we could say, okay, we think we've got the least amount of centralization that we need. We're trying to keep it very, very lean. And we're working with the people in these, you know, areas where we have some agilists in that space, but now we're at that point where we want to start socializing with more and more. So don't be surprised if people are like, oh, I've never heard of this. Then, you know, we are very happy to help and to lean in and help communicate. Let's go ahead and get into Mural. Go ahead and add your name here really quickly. Now we've pulled our Epic Canvas. We're really inspired by people like Ellen Gottesteiner or Roman Pickler who use a lot of canvases, and typically their canvases are dealing around a product. Now, if you are a pure product company or you are a lean startup, that's a nice clean package to use. But many times what we're working on are smaller than the big overall product. You still need that product, but what we're really trying to do is bring it down to a little more tactical level here. We're making that connective tissue. We've got the big bets, the big strategy, and now we're moving it into actionable backlogs using this Epic. The thing that has been working really well for the teams who are trying this is using this Epic canvas. It's a one-pager, and it's a one-pager meant to bring this alignment and buy-in with that integration team. Remember those leaders coming together. So it's not just product. You're not in here doing it yourself. And it's not a PMO making a plan. It's not a solution architect coming up with how it's going to be done. It's that group getting together and aligning on these high-level things. You can certainly go further, but what we really encourage is that you have a one-pager and that you get that high-level alignment before you get into the solutioning. We're framing the problem. Across the organization, including the new teams I'm working with in Citrusat in Australia, the number one thing I hear from people is that we're not good about framing the problem to be solved. We're really good at solving. We're really good at solutioning. And remember, that vacuum gets filled often with technical solutions. We might have a very technically oriented backlog versus a customer oriented backlog. So using epics consistently and really focusing on those business outcomes and epsilon impacts can help us raise that conversation up to be more strategic. So we get everybody in a room, we do an epic workshop, our activation work stream. People like Sarah, Rita, and Daniel have been doing this for a year, and it's really definitely taking hold. And we're using the model that they've refined and used there. Over in data engineering, we have our different teams are using those epics as they're coming in, but we're getting some socialization just from use, and now we're sort of starting to just formalize it. You certainly don't have to have a workshop, but I will tell you, it is so much better to get those people in a room doing that alignment together rather than trying to go round robin, because the decision makers, being in the room are understanding what, other people are saying about a trade-off or a constraint or a benefit or why something might need to be sequenced. So the most value comes from having that integration team together, fleshing out these epic workshops together. And it can look like a lot, but at the end of the day, it's really just these questions. If you can just align on these questions, you're going to have enough to start thinking about, your next steps with your team. And this is a very valuable artifact to use when you're setting up that vision for your team and you're setting up that next state, particularly if you've got multiple teams, because remember, an epic can cross multiple teams. So let me pause here. I don't want to go through all of these because they're a little bit self-explanatory, but what questions does this prompt? Because we have 2 exercises to dive into here to flesh them out. What questions about the epic canvas or the epic workshop does this prompt?
I think this looks very similar to the lean canvas that I know you cover in the PSPO classes. I do like the addition of the business value score, and I was curious, is that like the RICE type score that you're talking about there?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. So yeah, unlike a lean canvas, we know we're going to do this. A lean canvas or a business model might help you identify something when you really need to develop who's going to use it, how am I going to market this, where's my revenue going to come from. We've gone a step further into the tactical side now, right? We've got that happening from strategy. It's coming in from a product roadmap. We're moving into an actionable backlog. So very much like a lean canvas or a product canvas, we've just taken that and made our version. So some of them self-explanatory, the name, obviously. We really want to spend some time on aligning on the why. So that's what that getting everybody together in a workshop does. It really helps if you use, a little practice from design thinking, what we call a problem statement, and really making it human-centered. Who's going to use this? What is the problem you are solving? Even if you are an infrastructure team, you've got a human somewhere using what you're building. You might have to go a few steps out, but we really want to bring the conversation back to who's going to benefit from this, and then make it broad enough. It's an epic, it's a big thing. Make it broad enough that you have some negotiability there, but enough detail that people understand what it is that we're going to be delivering. So we're getting those strategic people to communicate in a strategic way that end game of the epic without delving into all of the user stories and the details first. Also, it really helps to define one primary persona. Many of our epics are going to have multiple personas, maybe even an admin. But think about who's the primary primary person. Is it a client? Is it a campaign manager? Is it another infrastructure? Is it another Epsilon team? Who's the primary persona? That's going to help you make decisions about what should be happening and how you can control some of the scope. For us, we like to put some ideas of product goals here in the Epic details. Again, we're staying high level. If you've got multiple teams, you might want to have a product goal per team. You might have product goals, that you share across teams. But again, you're making that traceability, that granular milestones of how you can get to an actionable backlog. We're putting in these steps before we get into something like a user story map or a sprint planning, so that we have this alignment with that group. Obviously, we love big pictures, being pictures. So it's helpful to put some kind of visual, maybe it's UX, maybe it's a data flow, something that's important to your team. It's important to talk about what done looks like, what is done, when is this epic going to be done? If you are an agile purist, you'd say, well, epics never get done. But because we're in a scaled environment, and because of the tools that we have, and because we want to control scope, we want us to close epics. We're going to close epics because the reporting that we can get out right now is coming out of that epic container in the tools that we have. So we're thinking about how we can use epics for big stuff and measure how it can be done. And one of the most important things is to decide how you're going to measure success. We want you to think about what we call both leading indicators, things that you can measure right away that will show you, sort of predict whether it's doing what you thought it would do, and lagging indicators, which are much bigger, they're much broader, they take a lot more time to get to, and we're going to practice this today. We also shockingly want you to try to put a size on it with this team. And we're going to show you how to do that with what we call relative order of magnitude sizing. And that is, again, it's a little bit of a pull from the air, right? But we want to have an understanding very, very early in the planning process if it is realistic for the time period. Many times we're getting things coming in, even into the readouts, where it's just too big. Sorry, not the readouts, but the product engineering meeting where product comes in and talks about what they want to do for the quarter. They're just way too big, and they're way too vague. The Epic helps us bring some structure around that conversation, and so we can get an idea of what we can do in a quarter very, very early. Right now, many of our product people do not know what is not going to be done in that quarter until they get to the readout, right? The teams have all this time, they're doing all this detail, they get to a readout, and many of them are even going into product backlog items and building out a whole quarter's worth of backlog items. With these types of conversations, you can have a high level understanding, and you can start to compare things to get an idea of what you can do from a capacity level and remove some of those things off the list very, very early, as soon as possible. As soon as you get an ask, we want you to start thinking about, do we have the capacity to deal with it? And we want to use numbers to do that. We do have 3 business drivers that have been approved and are working with both Rick Ehlert and with Myron. So we're asking you to use 3 different business drivers. They're pretty broad. You will need to work with your product managers and your leaders. These are just fields. If you tag one, they're very, very easy to change. We are looking to say, can we identify the purpose of why we're building something? If it's strategic revenue or efficiency, 1 second, Felice. Efficiency covers a lot. Efficiency covers things like infrastructure or compliance. We used to have multiple business drivers. We used to go further, and Rick and Myron and Brian and Jeff have decided strategic revenue and efficiency is enough. So if you're in doubt, just pick one and move it forward. If you're wrong, somebody's going to identify it. But what we're trying to do is for the upcoming quarter, we want to say these are the ideas of why we're doing something, and it should match product strategy. And then when Vidya is polling statistics at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year, assessing did our efforts match our product strategy, our investment that we wanted to make. Just want to pause there now. Felice, do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, it was just a very quick tactical one. So it looks like we've added this business driver field. We already had an investment category field that feels very similar. It had cost, revenue, strategic, and executive override. Are we no longer using the investment category field and the theme field?
Again, you can do more if you need it in your world, but for our world, we need these 3 under the business driver so that it rolls up to those metrics.
Okay.
So if you need to go further in your world with another field, you can do what you need to do. Right?
No,
You
I
might
mean,
have
this,
different needs, but from our perspective, for the reporting that goes to Brian, Myron, and Rick and Jeff, we want this business driver to have these 3 categories.
okay, this seems like one of those questions that's probably worth coordinating with the PMO, because they are the ones that were asking for those fields for similar reason, reporting to Rick and Brian. So they feel so similar in nature. It feels like it's just coming together and making a decision that now we're doing business driver and we're dropping the other field.
Yeah, well, Brian and Jeff have made the decision, right? And so they're driving this, and so again, part of the communication, part of the socialization. So yeah, if somebody else needs a different field for what they're doing, we can't manage, everything in every corner of Epsilon. But what we can ask for the teams that are in those spaces, that this field gets fleshed out. So good question. Thanks for that, Felice.
I had another one. Going back to just in general thinking, I was looking at that next field you had around target delivery date, and that felt very much like after an assessment. We've given a rough order of magnitude effort, and we think we're going to slot it in here. But as far as like the business giving us a sense of like, no, we really need this, it kind of goes into that priority conversation. Like we have a client who needs it by X date. Where in here would you suggest we put that kind of a detail?
Yeah, we go, well, I would flesh it out here, but it needs to be part of your target delivery date. And part of that is managing the scope. If you've got a hard deadline, you're going to have to manage the scope in order to meet that deadline.
Okay,
right?
so
And
we would just add it in the same field. This
Mhm.
is even pre-estimate. It's like, we know there's a demand for this by X date. It's
Yeah.
going to go here. Okay.
Yep. But when you start putting those things and you start aligning with everybody else and you're starting to talk about firm dates, there has to be trade-offs, right? There has to be trade-offs. You can't have everything fixed. So if you've got a fixed date, you're going to have that conversation with all those leaders involved about those trade-offs that have to happen, which means scope. Something else is not going to happen if you have to meet a deadline. So that's why it's important to have those decision makers in a room. If you had to make that decision by yourself, that's a lot of pressure and angst, and you don't know all the things that it's going to affect. But you get that integration team in a room to have that conversation, and it's a tough conversation to say what's not going to happen when we have a hard deadline, because you just don't have that flexibility. And remember, if you don't have those big long requirements documents, you're going to have to accommodate change. So we're going to talk about that in the last half of our session today. And then we do have a formula that we're using for business value score. It's got a funny acronym. It's called the SICO score. We've been using it for about a year. It's very, very simple. The EPIC dialogue or the EPIC template that we will introduce, you have those, some documents around that. We'll explain all that formula. Those are some things that your Scrum Masters can all explain as well. If you are not at a point where you are ready to use business value and you are doing something else for your prioritization, that's fine. We are using this extensively in data engineering. Different teams are more mature in this space. It's very, very helpful if you have a backlog that is very disparate. So data engineering, we don't have traditional product teams, right? Everything that comes in from a stakeholder can be vastly different. So having this quantifiable way to talk about value helps raise that conversation and change it from saying, oh, this deadline or priority to value and budget worth sequencing. We're trying to shift that conversation because many things can have the same deadline and the same priority. Everything can be high priority, but that doesn't mean they have the same value. So if this is an interesting conversation, you want to explore it, again, it's a little bit more in-depth. We would take the time and introduce it to you and show you how those fields work. But that is available. It has been being tested for about a year. It's working pretty well to give you a quantifiable way to identify value. Right, good questions. What else is this prompting? All right, just what it looks like. This is some examples from real life. This is one epic and how it shows up in different ways. Lock this down. So in this epic, this is how this epic template is being used in Jira. This is what it looks like. It's got the categories here. We've got a nice job aid with screenshots and how-tos, as well as your coaches that are going to know how to do this. So you enter the information in Jira using this template, using all of these things that are on this, Epic Canvas over here. You might do something in Mural or, another collaboration tool, but at some point it has to move into Jira. When you have an Epic in Jira, it can show up on a portfolio board. So that here is that Epic on a portfolio board for that team. So instead of having to have a status meeting, everybody can immediately see the status. But what this is doing is as you move it through these different cycles behind the scenes, you can measure those cycles. So if something is sitting in a cycle for a long time and you're trying to make things more efficient, you can take a look to see what might be happening. Those metrics are not going to tell you what might be happening, because everything could have a different reason, but it will indicate if things are taking longer than you thought, the areas that you want to dive into from a portfolio perspective. When we talk about portfolio, we mean multiple products, multiple pieces of stuff. It could be a project, it could be an initiative, it could be a work stream. It's just using that term portfolio to mean it's bigger than one team. Let me pause here and ask if there's any questions on this portfolio Kanban board.
I had two questions. Assuming Scrum board is also acceptable. Or are you specifically saying the portfolio needs to be Kanban?
Yeah, this is a Kanban board because this crosses multiple teams. So you might have Scrum teams, you might have Kanban teams, you might have component teams, you might have Agile PM teams, you might have just teams doing waterfall. So whatever they're doing on their board, they can continue to do. This board only shows epics.
Okay.
If you can, the ideal state would be, you can click on that epic and it's linked to the board. Again, getting into the how-tos, that's going to have to be a very hands-on coaching exercise, because boards can be set up very differently. This is a very valuable process, and we'll show you a little video in a little bit about how it's being used.
The other thing, and maybe this is in that tactical bucket as well, are you using a specific Jira template for your Epic? Because I know there's multiple process templates that are out there, and some teams are using different ones.
So the Epic template is a series of fields, if you will. And one of the things I want to make sure that you notice on our learning resources, there's a job aid here, and it shows that Epic template with all of the Jira how-to. So it's written down, there's screenshots about how to ask for this, what fields to use, and how to use them. However, once again, not in this alone. When you're ready to do this, get with one of our Scrum Masters and coaches, and we've got, Rita has got half time to work with anybody in that digital CDP space to really work through this. But if she's not available, we've got others. So great question. We've got aids, we've got help. We don't want to send you out there to have you do it yourself. We want to help you, but these are to help reinforce that process. And as you use them, if we've got gaps, we want to hear about that too. So great question. So it's a series of fields that you ask for to be opened up. And again, we'll work with you because we want the least disruption, right? So if you're at the end of the year, you're wrapping up a bunch of stuff, it's not going to make sense to make those changes now. But as you move into the next year and you've got new stuff, there's going to be a time where you're going to be ready to introduce those things, or you can introduce them and not use them until you're ready, right? So we'll help you work through that plan. In this environment, the Confluence gives you an ability to do more than you might see in Jira. This is a bit of a product wall that Aaron Barrett has put together. This is in Confluence. This is that same information, but he's able to add more details, things that you might have attached in an Epic. But if you build it out into a Confluence page, something like a product wall, it's very easy to see. So this is that same Epic. This is the big picture for that Epic. So you can see this is a pretty meaty thing. How it's being used in the tool, how it provides that traceability and that information all in one space, and it's all linked. If you are in this Jira Epic, it can link to the Epic Canvas. Over here in Confluence, the Confluence links back to the mural, right? So there's a lot of ways that you can do it to build that picture out for things that are more complex, which is really important, because if you've got multiple teams working on something, when you leave that workshop and you've got views like this, you're starting to build that buy-in and that common understanding. So we've got Scrum Masters and coaches who've done a lot of this. Do you want to add anything? Sarah, Rita, Daniel?
No, I was just thinking, I know on the Epic Kenmai, we, for the release forecasting, we hit something on the change bucket. Do we want to maybe hit on that for a minute?
We're going to in a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, but thank you for that. Perfect. Okay. We're going to get into that in the release planning side.
Awesome.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think for data, that portfolio Kanban, is that intake? I mean,
yes, yours is called intake. So that is all the epics in that space. It's one area where somebody can see all the epics in play. It's really valuable because you can order them by swim lanes, you can filter it out, but you're showing all the work in one place. And that one place can be whatever your group decides. In activation, the activation world, gosh, there's a lot of teams in there. There's AMS, there's some digital CDP, there's a little bit of SPG, there's a little bit of Disco Pro. And so that workspace is quite complicated, and it's probably going to grow as we do more, particularly with the new 24 objectives coming in or outcomes coming in. I suspect we're going to see more emphasis on how those epics fit into the bigger picture.
When they come into intake, they're requests, but essentially
you have a different language, but yes.
Okay, good. Just want to make that transition because there were some questions. Sidebar.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Again, probably a lot of translation is happening. We're trying to find sort of terms we can use, but as you move into your group, again, you're going to leverage, us, your knowledge, the aids that we have, and we're going to work through it together. And you're going to figure out, we're going to help you. We're going to be like, momentum, trying to keep the momentum, but you're going to figure out the right time to do these things too. So this is a good time to introduce it because we're going to have these 24 objectives coming in, and we want to see this stuff on the new stuff. If you've got something that's in play, I would just continue to do what you're doing because you want to close that up and get it done. But these new things coming in for 2024, we want you to start practicing some of these new behaviors. All right, we're going to go into one conversation. Specifically, we find a couple of areas that we wanted to dive into. And one of them is this idea of how do you measure leading and lagging indicators for an epic. So what you're going to do in this exercise is you're going to explore leading and lagging indicators together. You're just going to take these different ways to measure things at an epic level and drag them over to leading and lagging. When you're done with your exercise, anybody in your group, but don't move it till you're done, can just right click on this gray box and move it out of the way or delete it and check your answers. All right. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes for this exercise. I'll know when you're done because I'll see this box moving. So if you get done super fast, we'll come back early. But otherwise, you'll have 10 minutes to work through leading and lagging indicators. And this is meant to give you some exposure to how you could measure the success of a metric. Some of you who might have different teams might have to do some of that translation again. So you can also add some things if you think of new ideas. Questions on what we're going to do? All right, and let me make sure. Daniel, which room are you in?
He's in team 1 with me.
I'm in team 1, yep.
And Ranjith, which team do you want to go to? You want to go to, go ahead.
I'm okay, Julie, any team.
You want me to put you in 1 because Paramita is in there?
Yep.
Okay, all right. All right, I'm going to open the rooms and I'll see you back. I got a few things in red here and a little bit of a caveat that you're probably going to figure out. Leading and lagging indicators are very contextual. They can be used in many different ways. So we've given you a little bit of an answer key to help guide you, but it really depends on the context that you're using them. Our goal is that you start thinking about leading and lagging indicators, because too many times we'll say, well, this epic is going to drive revenue. No team that I know of is explicitly able to measure revenue, from one thing, right? So we want more leading indicators and less emphasis on the lagging indicators. So keep that in mind, and then let's talk through any surprises, ahas, or discontent that you had with this. I see this one's got a couple of reds. Anybody want to speak about it in team 1?
I think for me, and I just said this, for me, the cycle time, I think depends. It could be, I said it should be in the middle, really, because for me, it's like, I don't know how I would be able to use cycle time as a leading indicator. Maybe that's just something I need to learn more about. But for me, it was like kind of in the middle.
Well, what does cycle time give you? What do you learn from it?
well, how long something could potentially take.
Right, to deliver. And if you can deliver it faster, then could that give you an indication? If you can get something in the hands of somebody faster, to get feedback faster, that would be a leading indicator because it's not using any historical data. Right. So the whole point is that's a leading indicator. Like the faster you can get something in the hands, the sooner you can have those feedback loops, could be more of a leading indicator. That would give you more time to do other things, cost of delay, maybe bring in innovation. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
I 100% agree. Everything is contextual, but I would lean towards that one.
Okay.
Good call out. Others? How many noticed that? Go ahead.
Sorry, Julie. Defect rate was a bit of a controversial for me.
Yeah. Which group were you in?
Group 1.
In group 1. Okay. So can we see that defect rate could be used 2 different ways? Defect rate can be an indicator of what's happening right now. And especially if you're immediately delivering something, you can immediately check your defect rate and see how you're doing. So it's a leading indicator of quality. So you can use it for a leading indicator. You want to get something out there, especially if you have a warranty period. It's going to give you a measure to see, how you're doing, whatever that looks like. But it can also be used as a lagging indicator over time. So again, contextual, but that's one of those that could be used in both ways very easily. Do you agree, disagree? Have anything you want to add?
No, what you said is right. But more often than not, we sort of associate that, oh, this is done. It's history. Now I can't go back and change. That's how I was thinking. The defect rate is something, okay, the quality is undone. Now how do I go and fix it, for example?
Yeah. We could give you a leading indicator of your quality. You don't want to wait until 6 months or the end of the year to check in on your defect rate to measure your quality standards. So that could be something that you could use right away to see how you're doing with your Epic. It could be a measure of something to see if you're predicting success.
Gotcha.
Good call outs. Any others?
So, Julie, for us, for cycle time, we had put it under lagging.
Okay.
Because we thought it's measuring the it says measure the average time. So we thought that average time we can get from the historical data and then only we can see how it is more.
Good call out. Yeah, absolutely. I don't disagree. There's almost no wrong answers in a way because it's really about context, but it is hopefully getting you to think about how you can use more of these different types of measures when you're thinking about how to measure success. And many of these leading indicators, who has control over the leading indicators? Who's controlling those leading indicators? Most of them.
You mean capturing what they are, or the fact that they're
influencing them? If you wanted to make a change to one of these leading indicators, who can influence these leading indicators?
It's the measurement of past history, right? So
the leading is pretty current. Leading is what's happening right now. So who can influence? Yes, product owners can influence so many of these things on the leading indicators. When you get into lagging, customer satisfaction scores, you may not have a very direct cause and effect relationship. So some of these are going to be a little bit harder for you as a product owner to feel like you can influence, but you can influence a lot of leading indicators. So go ahead.
But aren't the values that come in, like leading indicators often are the lagging indicators from the last release, right? It's sort of what information did you glean from the last time you released your features? And because of that, how do you prioritize what you want to pull in to the current wave of work?
Okay. I mean, if you're using something like feature completion rate, you're tracking to see how quickly your team can
get stuff done,
get through that, right? So you can control that because you can control scope and you can remove interruptions and you can remove context switching and all of those things. So those are just measures to see what you can do to influence some of those things. That it's going to give your team more of an ability to shift to something. Maybe they need to shift to those enhancements coming in from something that's been released. But most of these, if you really think about your leading indicators and you're getting these, you're understanding how your Epic's starting to perform in different ways other than revenue or, customer satisfaction, you can think about bringing them back into your team to make changes that make sense for the team. Does that make sense?
I guess I'm sort of measuring what came out of the last release could be used as I was thinking, a leading indicator to determine what to work on in the next
Something like
release.
this, probably feature usage analytics.
Yeah.
Sure. If
Yeah.
they're, you know,
Yeah.
if you're getting that information and how to do that, that could easily be one that could influence your next release.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's more. We just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor of this because we want to see more leading indicators, more of the things that the team can control, more ownership over, you know, the success of that metric earlier in the process. Immediately as you're starting to think about getting things out there in the hands, how can you measure to see if you can, if you're going to be able to look at this a year from now and see if we met success. So we're looking for more leading indicators that the team, and particularly that the product owner, can influence. All right, I don't know about you all, but I'm ready for a little break. What do you think?
Sure.
All right, if
Okay.
you can get your cameras on, I'll know you're back. We can get going. We're going to immediately go into another conversation, and this is about ROM sizing, rough order of magnitude. Who here has heard about ROM sizing besides my team? My team better say yes.
All
Anybody?
raised our hand.
Anybody using it now? Is anybody using relative order of magnitude to size anything?
We're doing with the
Cool.
DCDP Foundation's t-shirt sizing.
Nice.
So.
Perfect. That's exactly how we want to use it. I love that. Anybody else?
Yeah. So Julie, is this related to some kind of a ballpark estimation?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So we also do that.
Exactly. Okay, good. Well, then this will go very, very fast. So let me just show this one slide, and then we're going to do an exercise. For those of you where it might be new, we want to start doing rough order of magnitude sizing. When we do that, it's relative sizing. Agility really works with relative sizing. You don't have these big, long requirements documents. You don't really know what you're getting into. So it's a little bit of PFA, pull from the air. But one of the things that you can do is you start with something that is known, an epic that you feel pretty comfortable with, and you put a size on it, a t-shirt size on it, and then you compare the other epics for your quarter. Is it bigger, smaller, or about the same? Is it a lot bigger, a lot smaller? And you're just starting to do those comparisons. So you don't need to spend the time to go deep into each epic. If you have a good known epic, you can start to decide kind of what your capacity looks like by using these t-shirt sizes. T-shirt sizes have to have a number behind them, right? And that number has to be agreed upon in the teams that you work with. So again, that integration team, you want to come to an understanding of what that t-shirt size looks like. And we typically start with something like weeks, durations of weeks, because some people might be using points, some people might be using hours. So we just size epics in terms of duration of weeks. It's a common language, it's a common currency we can use. And we expect that as you use your refinement, you're going into agility. Refinement is a lot of progressive elaboration. You're giving your team hopefully multiple times to touch those things and to refine them more and more and more. But if you can do a ROM very, very early, you're going to be able to say, this is not going to fit in our quarter. And you're going to have those trade-off conversations. And somebody's going to say, it has to be there. And you're going to talk about business value. And somebody else is going to have to compromise on what they're going to do. So we want to get that understanding of what we can do realistically in the quarter very, very early in planning. You can always stack your backlog with future epics. You know, if you are having a wonderful quarter or a wonderful period and you want to add more in, you can always stack more, but we want to get a better understanding of what is realistic for the time period. That is one of the number one things that Brian talks about in the conversations with product. He'll say, you know, is this realistic? And they haven't yet had that conversation with our POs to say, is this something that can actually be done in the quarter? So we want to move that conversation up. We want to move it up way before the readout. As soon as you get something coming in, you want to start, you know, adding in this rough order of magnitude on with all the other teams. Remember, this epic is going to cross teams. So you got to have that integration team together to have that conversation and agree on that size so that you can look at those capacities and see if it's in the realm of possibility. Or if you're working with a deadline, same conversation, you know, you're looking to say, like, you know, if you were buying a house, like what neighborhood are we going for? What size of house are we going for? What's our budget? What's it worth? You're having those very high level conversations. Questions on the concept?
Just real quick, Julie. So is this really to understand a general idea of calendar time for a particular epic to complete, or is it to get a sense of how much work the teams can take on?
Both.
Because
Yeah.
okay, because part of what's a little bit challenging is sometimes with cross team dependency, something might take 3 sprints to do, but the team that's involved in one of the teams that's involved in that might have a very tiny part in that. So even though they're all of the things they're involved in take maybe add up to more than you can do in a quarter, so it just gets a little bit confusing sometimes when we're looking at that.
So what works for us is getting that integration team in the room to talk about that, so that you're setting that expectation about that dependency very, very early. And then the goal would be that team goes and does their part as agreed upon, so that those delays can be less and less and less. And what we find is often we might work with that team a couple weeks in advance, but they've already got stuff on their backlog, and then it pushes it out and it pushes it out. Or they finish something, but your team isn't ready to accept it or test it. So we want to bring those conversations up earlier in the process. It's not going to eliminate them all, but we're looking, could it eliminate, could it mitigate 50%? Could it mitigate 80%? We want you to try to bring those conversations earlier into the process. Felice.
So going back to your comment earlier where epics are actually shared across teams, which today we don't do. We share the capabilities across teams, so that's kind of our equivalent. When we're doing this t-shirt sizing, are you looking to do the kind of largest common denominator? So I think of like an epic that both Jennifer, Kim, and I work together on delivering nearest location capability. Well, the effort that might have been for, say, one team might not be that big, where the effort for another team might be more substantial. So how do you do the ROM sizing when you've got different teams impacted in different ways by that epic?
It'll be a culmination.
A combination. So if it's small for me, extra large for Kim, and large for Jennifer, we're saying it's an extra large because Kim's the greatest.
It's a culmination. It's one epic. You're all agreeing on the size of that one epic.
But I'm thinking about like capacity planning for my particular team. I can do a lot of small things, so I can take on more work for that one piece. Maybe mine is a small, so I'm not going to tag it as an extra large because it's not an extra large for me.
You have one epic across those teams, so the epic is only tagged once. How you do your stuff in your team, you can tag that how you want. You might use another bucket. You might use a version. You might just do a combination of story points or items, but you have one epic across the team. So you as a group are deciding, you got all these pieces, is this an extra large? Is this a large? It's one number.
I get the guidance. I think that's actually why we ended up doing this at the capability level, because at the epics, I can still look at my backlog with my epics and say, I've got 50 smalls and one large. So
let's problem solve together, but we don't have that capability to do that across the company, and get those reports out like we do with the epics, which is, again, I know it's going to be difficult because we're asking that pocket of teams to change, but we do want you to change how you're using epics. So you'll have to figure out, we'll help you with help, how we can look at that epic and size it. So again, I know I keep pushing off the problem solving, but we have many, many diverse teams here, and it's really about socialization of the intent, with knowing that we are going to have to go into each group and socialize and change and figure out what makes sense and help you get there. And again, there's no deadline, but we do want some urgency. This is, supported by Jeff and Brian, and the timing is specific. So we do want some urgency, but not disruption, right? So we're here to help you with that. So let's talk a little bit about rough order of magnitude. What you're going to do in this exercise, just a fun little exercise. The sun is your anchor. And in this exercise, you're just going to quickly organize them from left to right, the left being the furthest away and the left being the closest to the sun and the left furthest away. So you're going to end up with one line on your mural. And when you are ready, we'll talk about it together. So each of you have a little bit of a gallery here with your celestial bodies. and have some fun with it. We're going to come back and talk about the things that we can learn even from a very simple exercise like this one, if I can unlock it. All right, everybody know where they're going? All right, it's a fun exercise. I'll give you 7 minutes. If I see all the planets in a line, in a row, like ducks, I'll bring you back. Let's see if everybody's in their rooms. I think we're good, and I'll bring you back in 7 minutes, if not sooner. Welcome back. Showing you the answers. What did you learn? What did you learn from this conversation? Anything?
Some things are just too big to care about.
Oh, like what?
Anything bigger than the sun?
Really?
And so what would happen in real life if you had something that was so big and so vague? What would you do if you were trying to size it?
Break it down.
Blow it up and make it smaller.
You blow it up and make it smaller. Thank you. Was that Amy?
No, it was Kim.
Kim, yes, that's exactly right. When you have things that are so big, you don't even need to bother sizing them. You can put an imaginary number on them because you're going to have to bring them in to a scale that works for you. And you're going to have to probably do more refinement, more information, right? Any of you Google these things?
Yep. And according to what I Googled, 1101 is actually the largest. It's bigger than
Daniel, are you wrong? Are you wrong on this?
I'm not wrong, because Hercules Corona Borealis is the largest celestial object in the universe.
Ooh.
You can go argue with Google. I didn't know the answer, but multiple articles in Google call it the biggest.
What'd you say, Meek?
A great wall.
I said Hercules is the largest observable in the universe.
The largest known observable structure.
What about these things that are a little bit smaller? They're a little bit closer. What did you feel about those things? The moon, the Earth, Jupiter?
Confident.
But probably a little more confident, yeah. So it isn't really about sizing. These sizes here really around distance, really. But you feel more confident because they're known more. They're more known to you, right? More is known about these things. So it's the same exact thing with sizing epics. You want to start with an epic that you know you might have to do. Then if you've got an epic, you might have to do impact mapping to break it down. You might even go as far as user story mapping to break it down to get a good feeling about one epic in all this stuff coming up, especially if you've got a big initiative that's got lots of epics. But once you get that anchor, try this exercise. Is it bigger, smaller, or about the same? And then every time you go into refinement, you're going to get more and more details about it. And you're going to start, in a sequence so that your teams are going to be breaking them down in a sequence. There's no need to get your team in a room for 10 weeks or 6 weeks or 3 weeks, sizing every product backlog item. You don't need to do that in release planning with a rough order of magnitude. You just need to get a good handle on one, and then everything else is comparing. That's because we're welcoming change, right? If you've got a deadline on, your epic, you're probably gonna have to do a little bit more research, a little bit more confidence on it. But otherwise, we're really looking to see if we can get that cutoff on capacity within multiple teams very, very early on. Because we can only go as fast as the slowest team, right? So if you got something with a deadline, you want to resolve those dependencies and those friction points early. And you want to know that going into your planning so that you have a good sequence of things with each of your teams and an expectation about when that work is going to be completed. The more you can move those dependencies up in your period, the faster you will be able to go. All right, so just a fun little exercise to talk about it. We've been using these t-shirt sizes. We would encourage you to start here if you don't have them because they have been used and validated for about a year. This started in data engineering. We even went so far as to look at some cost numbers and things and got that validated by finance. So we encourage you to start with it and see if you can use the same consistent patterns. The first thing you would do is ask those leads in that integration team, which includes your solution architect and people who know more about the technology, to put a t-shirt size on it. This isn't you, this isn't your developers, because again, it's crossing teams, right? It's an epic that's crossing teams typically and a lot of complexity. So we want all those leads to agree on the duration. If you've got things that are coming in about 1 person week of labor, you don't need to bring that into an epic. You can handle that, with your regular sprint planning or refinement or how you do that. But this is really meant for those big blocks so that we can check capacity and we can assess investments and we can report on that. Go ahead, Felice.
When we're looking at something like a large, if we end up on the higher end of large, we need to decompose that as well, because I would.
It's just like sprint planning. You're going to know what busts your sprint in sprint planning. It's the same thing with release planning. If you've got a large and you think it's going to bust the seams, then I would break it down. Certainly, anything more than about 3 months, it's just too much in the future. We're moving too fast. Right? We're not looking for granularity after about 3 months. And so we want you to stay high level and don't spend a whole lot of time on refinement because all of that could be waste. So you move into that just-in-time pattern. And we do like to give our teams, that 3-touch system. So we're looking at it from a roadmap and release planning level. You're looking at it again in refinement, and then you're looking at it again in sprint planning. So by the time they're working on it, there's been multiple ways to sort of think and problem solve and remove dependencies, but we want this connective tissue. We want this big view and preview happening so you can remove those, those disagreements, those friction points, those misunderstandings at this high level first. And it's really shocking to us. When we started working with activation, we asked for a diagram and we got it. We got 6 or 7 of them. And none of them matched. Luckily, we picked one to work with that a lot of people had some familiarity with, but there's some magic about bringing those people in a room and working on these things together. Now, what might be missing from here? Thinking about agility and change and stuff coming in.
Yeah, the impact on timing because of a high priority item that comes in.
Yeah, so you're going to know the flavor, the climate of your team. If you've got a lot of things that come in that disrupt you, you're going to want to add, time or a change bucket if you've got things that come in differently. So this isn't necessarily about this is more around effort than duration. We're really thinking about effort. Your duration is, going to be planned out through your sprints, but really think about effort because you want to stack that up and get them as small cycle times as possible. But if you've got a lot of high demands that come in that disrupt your sprint and you know that, you can measure that. Those are known unknowns. You can measure it and you can get a trend. I have to spend 15% of my time with keeping the lights on. I have 10% of my time on defects. Those are known unknowns. You also have to welcome the unknown unknowns. We have a high level epic. We haven't taken the time for a lot of requirements gathering, or even on the delivery side, they're moving away from that, and it's you're sort of anticipating what kind of change it is. So we want you to ask your team, ask that integration team about their confidence. What's the unknown? The unknown unknowns on this piece of work, and put a number around it. Get an idea of percentage, because we don't know what we don't know. It's a guess. It's definitely a guess. But as you start practicing this, you're going to get insights from others. They might say, we've done something similar. Somebody else might say, we're not set up for this. Somebody else might say, I got to do all this, architecture runway. Somebody else might say, we're doing this over here. We can leverage it. But that's that value of getting that integration team together to talk about what we don't know. And then you're adding on to your effort anticipated change. You're managing for change. You're expecting change. You're welcoming change. And you're doing that by adding time and effort onto that ROM. So if you're on the high end of small, you're probably going into a medium, right? If you're on the high end of medium, you're probably going into a large. So you're planning for change. This isn't accommodating to keeping the lights on. This is accommodating the things that you don't know that are going to happen in this epic because we haven't done requirements gathering. So let me pause there. Questions, comments, disagreements? Piece of cake. We're going to talk more about this when we get into release planning. You can actually add a change bucket and manage that as well.
Was that previous slide in the slide deck, Julie?
Yes. Double check for me. You can be my QA. Should all be in there. Okay. I want to move into what we're going to call our demo portion of this. Go ahead.
Oh, yep, we got it. Thanks.
Okay, awesome. And again, they're meant as guidelines. If your group wants to change them, you just need to make sure that whatever team is impacted by what you're doing, your nest of teams, you got to all agree. So we've been testing out these t-shirt sizes. They've been working well. No need to reinvent the wheel, as I say. All right, I want to show you a little bit on a demo of what happens when we have these things. So let me make sure my sound is on and show you a little bit of a video. This is a video from one of our coaches who is explaining when you look at that EPIC data and you look at an EPIC report, things that will show you when you actually get into it, what it will do for you. And I think my sound is on, so we should be okay.
I can't hear anything, Julie.
Welcome. Have you
Oh, now I
ever
can.
set a completion date only to discover that you were far from meeting it? We've all been there. So you might wonder, how can you effectively track the progress of your quarterly epics to enhance predictability? Let me introduce you to one method AMS uses to monitor epic progress. It is our epic dashboard developed through EasyBI. This dashboard, which I'm sharing, allows you to filter data by program increment, which aligns with specific quarters. Within this tool, we track the actual progress of epics. The color coding is key. The green represents the percentage of story points completed. Blue indicates the percentage currently in progress, and gray denotes the remaining percentage yet to be tackled. Let me illustrate with an example. Let's take a look at scheduled audience here at the bottom. This is a substantial project spanning the entire quarter. In this case, you'll see in green, 22% of the story points for this epic have already been completed, while in blue, 48% are actively being worked on, and in gray, 30% of story points remain in the to-do stage waiting to be addressed for the epic. This visualization is very useful to our product owners, allowing them to track epic progression. Moreover, it encourages collaboration with your team, enabling you to gather insights that would enhance your ability to predict completion dates more accurately. Thank you for taking the time to explore this information, and I hope that it provides you with valuable insights.
All right, any questions on how that team is using epics and a dashboard? Interesting, valuable, not?
I know that on the IQ side, we've been using these for a while, so
nice.
Nothing
That's
new.
great. All right, let me show you one more, and this is on our portfolio Kanban board and the value that a group is getting out of using that one. See if I can get it to play.
Hi, I'm Daniel Barrett. Today I'm going to be talking to you about how Activation uses Portfolio Kanban to bring transparency to the epics in our system. Imagine you live in a coastal town and your friends and family desperately need water. You look outside and you see a vast ocean. You need to boil it before you can use it for drinking, watering, recreation, chores, etc. You think to yourself, I could boil this whole thing at once, but that would require a lot of energy. There has to be a better way. So then it occurs to you, you have a pot, you have a small fire. What if you started boiling it in batches? You get to work. As you process your batches, you start to notice the steps you're taking to move towards your goal. You take time to review your steps to speed up progress. You notice you can move faster if you limit the amount you boil in a batch. Maybe see how you could get friends involved. Eventually, you get to a point where you realize you have exactly what you need, and it turned out you didn't have to boil the whole ocean. You're able to achieve your goals at a fraction of the cost. This is what Portfolio Kanban does for us. It allows us to organize a flow around a big undertaking. gives us the ability to measure our performance as we move through our steps to progress towards our goal. In the activation system, we are using it to help build functionality to allow our customers to quickly and effectively activate advertisements to consumers. We can park more ambiguous items in a backlog until they become more clear, while we move a select number of items through stages in the system as they are needed. We have discovery, pending, in progress, deployed, integration testing, and done. The tools we use allow us to track metrics like cycle time, or how fast it takes to get work done, and throughput, or how much work we can get done in a given period. Overall, this practice improves our ability to be a reliable partner to our customers by allowing us to deliver committed value on time, as agreed to. Thank you. Hopefully this gives you some insight into how you can use Portfolio Kanban to move towards your goals.
Questions, comments? Good, bad?
I like how you, Daniel, this was awesome. I like how you were talking about like the ocean and boiling water and kind of putting like a story in my head. So that was really cool. So thank you.
Nice. All right, and I have one more for you, and this is on the change bucket. All of these videos are here in our learning resources, and even more. Daniel's done one on cycle and lead time that's there. So let's watch this one about the change bucket.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to show you how to create a change bucket and then add it to a version. So we have this example here. We estimated here 2 weeks, 2 days. And now when I add it to, this is before I add it to the version. And notice here where we're at. And then I'm going to add it to this version. And then I'm going to refresh. Okay, so you notice here. So this is before, this is after, and this would be adjusted as you go through the project, as you get closer to the end and ready for the release, and you're more confident in that release date. But it gives you something to work with. Thank you very much.
Okay, what did you all notice from that demo? Once you add that change bucket, what happens?
There was a big cone of uncertainty.
The big cone of uncertainty. So this is a tough story. Business people don't love to hear this story, right? They don't want to understand. They don't want to, see that, oh, this is an unrealistic deadline. And when I add this small change bucket of, because I talked to my team and all the leads about uncertainty, it pushes it forward into the future. But it is a critical conversation to have. Many of us are planning for those known unknowns, but we're packing things too full and we're not allowing for those changes. We're not allowing for the unknown unknowns. So we're going to shift our focus now to talk about release forecasting, and so this is a little bit more informational and a little bit less how to, because it's going to rely on you all and your system setup and what tool you're using. So it's not going to be as tactical as the epics, where we're hoping it'll still give you some good practices to understand and to take back and start exploring in this next quarter with your team. So let's start with this little exercise. Let me summon you here. We're just going to have this. We're just going to have this conversation together. You're going to do this. Oh, sorry, Kim. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about the change bucket. We don't have to do it now, but
Nice.
just how that was done. That seemed really interesting.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And it's a critical aspect, because Jira is a ticketing system, and they've added on agile elements, right? And they're getting better, but it's only going to report on what's in there. Mm-hmm. Right? So you have to game the system. You have to add things in order for those charts to show empirical data around change. And I think Mary mentioned, as you go through your refinement, your change bucket is going to get less and less, because you're going to be adding scope, right? You don't know those details. So if let's just make the math easy. Let's say I've got an app that gets in 1,000 points. once you put your change bucket. Maybe it was 600 points and you added a change bucket, it's 400 points or units, whatever you're using. That's a big change bucket. But it's day one, you don't know what you don't know. The next time you go into release planning, maybe you've got some features done, maybe some of those dependencies are done, you've been adding product backlog items in, your change bucket is going to reduce. So you've added a couple hundred points of scope, you're going to take out a couple hundred points of scope on your change. And it's going to be reflected in your charts, and it's the epic that runs those charts. That's why we have to be consistent about our use of epics, so we can get those charts and those reporting out there. You know, I know we don't want the tool to dictate everything, but we are working within some limitations, and it's that epic container and those epic reports that work, you know, around the world with even with Citrus Ads version. So we need that consistency, and I know it's going to cause some heartburn in the you know, those kernel teams where you guys are using capabilities, but we'll find a way to help you shift that.
Okay, but it's a way in the tool to detect things that were added after you started the epic.
Yes.
Is that right? Oh, that's
yes.
awesome. That would be
and
fantastic.
The epic reports will show you that. They'll show you those scope changes. They've got these nice bar charts. It's how Jira was designed, right? And it's part of the normal agile taxonomy, which is fine. The capabilities and some of those other things are actually coming out of people using things like Jira Align, which we don't have. That is a reflection of somebody, you know, using some component, some element that they've learned somewhere else, but it doesn't actually work for what we're trying to do here. And that's why there's this, you know, change that we have to be making. Yeah. Okay, so let's do this fun exercise. I want you to take this seriously, like pretend this is real life. You are going to a wedding. You're planning a road trip. Now, let's pretend it's May 31st. You have a month to plan. You have to get to this family wedding on July 1st. Now, you're going to be driving across country. You're going to be going from Jacksonville, Florida to a venue at the Grand Canyon. If you're not from America, you can Google those things. You know you're going to take your family car, right? Because you're going to have at least one dog and one child with you, and they're going to both be in the wedding. And so you don't want to fly. You're going to take your family car. That's what you're going to be using. Now, you know, you have limited time off due to some other commitments. So you need to make this trip fun for your family as well as efficient, right? Hold on. Puppy's going crazy there. So I want you to think about, jot down on your notepad, you know, how much time are you going to ask for? How many travel times are you going to use to go from Jacksonville, Florida to the Grand Canyon in your family car, and with this at least one dog and one child with you? Let's just spend a minute and start putting we're looking for a number. We're looking for the number of days. Go ahead and start putting them in these yellow and blue boxes. I'll put a minute.
Round trip, right?
No, we're just getting to the wedding. You just need to be to the wedding on time, but you got to make it fun, and you have these other constraints. Good clarifying question. Anybody else? All right, have some fun. Let me put a minute on the clock. We'll see how you're doing on your number. While you are coming to it, start thinking about all the things that you are taking into account. Nice. Looks like most of you got some stuff. You started putting down all those things that you're taking into account. Well done. But we have a pretty big variety in days. Some of you are going straight through with 3 days. Some of you have got 10 days. So let's take a look at some things that we considered. I see some bio breaks, lots of bio breaks and rest stops. Some motivation of the driver, gas refills, amount of time you're driving, right? Nice. I want to stay married. That's my favorite. Might be some trade-offs having to happen. So let's look at this. So some of you thought about this. You don't take those breaks, that's going to happen. Some of you thought about this. Right? There's just going to be a time limit where they're going to say enough. So those breaks are going to get more and more important. They might even, you know, turn into some illnesses. Did anybody think about this? What might be happening here?
Car breaks down.
Your car breaks down. Yeah. Anybody? Yeah, it's an unknown unknown. Yeah, or your sightseeing. This is an unknown unknown. Things happen that you can't predict, and you have to be at this wedding on time. So you probably should do what? When you're thinking about that time, you have to be there on time. What would you do to your travel time. If you didn't think about it before, what would you do now?
I gave a buffer of a day.
Leave a buffer.
You gave a buffer. You gave a buffer. That's a change bucket, right? So that's really what we're doing. We do this all the time in real life. If you're getting on an airplane, you know, you're going to add a buffer if you know that there's some traffic, because that airplane's going to leave without you, right? We do it all the time in real life. What about this?
I added some of that.
That is the sightseeing.
You're gonna sightsee. You're trying to make this trip enjoyable. What happens if you don't have enough of time for this? What happens to these things?
They become more stressful.
Become more stressful. And what do you do? What do you do? What are your decisions? What happens to those things? Something has to drop. Yes, those are trade-offs. That's you do this all the time in real life. The more successful that you are at forecasting and trade-offs, the happier your trip is going to be. So it's not an unfamiliar concept, but for some reason, we're really reluctant to think about adding the unknown unknowns into our estimates. And you have to do it in agility because we don't have requirements. We have high level expectations. We have targeted objectives. You have to build in some ability to welcome change. Now, it's not, you know, you're going to stop at some tourist attractions. You know, you're going to stop. These are have tos. This might be a nice to have to keep your familiar relationships happy, but are these nice to haves? These are must-haves. You know these, you can measure these, you can plan for these. You can't measure these, so you have to leave some room. You have to leave some change, and you're going to do that even in that first level of estimating. And the more that you go further on your trip, the less chance there is for things to happen. So your change bucket gets less and less because you're filling it in with the things that have happened, right? So we do this all the time when we're traveling. We look for different roads. We look for, you know, there's a closure, there's traffic, you know, Waze or your map app is telling you different ways to go. It's exactly the same elements at play. Is everybody making that connection? All right, and that's all it's doing. It's literally a little bit of a math exercise. You're thinking about, you know, your total miles, right? Like how far you're going, that's velocity or throughput. You're dividing it by the number of hours you want to drive in a day. You get that basic travel days. And then you're adding on those buffers. And those buffers should include those, you know, how much nice to haves, how much have to haves, and your unknown unknowns. You have to add those in because the only thing that really can move is going to be those tourist attractions, right? You're not going to be able to move. You're not going to be able to change some things. You've got those must-haves. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know about the requirements coming in that you don't know about that might add some complexities. So if you don't add enough, you're going to end up always either exceeding your time period or you're making some people pretty unhappy. And that's what we don't want. We don't want to see people working at an unsustainable pace or getting frustrated, or even worse, you know, those fake deadlines, the deadlines that aren't really deadlines. All right, so that's all we're doing here. So let's check in with Peyton here, our Peyton, the product owner. So Peyton was actually pretty successful when she started using epics and product goals. Getting that alignment with all those people really helped. And in fact, she was able to even think about some sequencing with them because they were looking at this big picture. Instead of looking at just their team, they were looking at these big pictures and they started making some trade-offs. Again, real life example, but it wasn't enough. The stakeholders had committed the stake out to the salespeople. There were already some communications going out to clients, and they really were kind of stuck on it. So Peyton still felt the deadline was pretty unlikely. So this is what she did. She started looking at how to do some release forecasting. So remember, we're looking at release planning. We've got the big stuff coming in. It's a known thing. We're not going as far down into sprint planning. So it's that middle area. And we want to build out a plan so we know how to get to the wedding on time. We're building out these milestones and where we need to be in order to get on time. We can have a banging sprint. We can have a great sprint, but that doesn't mean that you're on time for your release, right? So when we think about that release planning, again, you've got that team in there, that integration team in there. You want to start thinking about the sequencing of the epics and what this release could look like if you've got multiple teams in there. And you want to lay it out on a map. Now, we often start with that ideal burn up, right? But then you're going to add in all of those other complexities, right? the tourist stops, the flat tires, the brakes. You're going to add all that in with your change bucket, and you got to be realistic. So, you know, if you're new in a project and you've got a lot of complexity, it might be a bigger change bucket than not. If you go into this process of you're working with your iteration team and you are trying to, if people are getting into product backlog items and user stories, you're going too far. Pull back. If you leave there and you have a really low confidence, you need to go back in and do more. You need to do a little bit more refining, a little bit more conversation. So those are just little litmus tests about, you know, how far you go with this. And I kind of cut it off. Like, I don't want that integration team going into the tactical. I want them to stay strategic. So as soon as they start getting into those details, you know, we try to pull back. All right, there's a lot in here. I'm going to talk a little bit about these things in our exercises over here, and then we'll come back. Just use our time wisely. Again, a lot of this stuff may be, you know, may be new. You might be doing pieces of it. A lot of this part is informational because each team is doing things differently. You might not have your epics in place yet. The way that we're asking to, your tool might be different. That's where we're relying on your scrum masters and coaches and your initiative and, you know, all of your partners. We want to come together and over the next few months start seeing some of these practices in play. So let's take a look at this diagram. Let me summon you here. Going to bring it up a little bit closer. Go ahead, take a minute looking at this diagram. See if you can tell, what can you infer just looking at this diagram where you're going to work in silence. Think about all those things that go into planning and go ahead and add some notes around here. We'll give it a minute just for you to absorb this and add your notes. All right, so a lot of people recognize in order to get a chart like this, you need some estimates, but we just talked about this. You don't know what you don't know. You don't have requirements. So we're going to talk about how to handle that. So what's missing from this chart? A change bucket, big letter. Thank you. Nicely done. That's great. All right, so thinking about this, how likely is it that this team is going to meet this deadline? If you had to put a percentage on it, very important thing, what would you say? How likely are they going to meet this release date?
Low.
Pretty low confidence, right? So how much change bucket would you put in? Throw out a number. You got about 5 sprints here. You know you're not going to make it. Maybe you can kind of guess how many sprints, but it's only reflecting what's in the system. So how much change bucket are you going to add in?
About 240 points.
And tell me how you got there.
It looks like we've got about 60 points. So just to give us more cushion, I just multiplied that by 4.
Yeah, it could be a little bit of, you know, PFA, but really you got to talk to the integration team, right? You got to see that change bucket in action, and that's when it's going to all come into play. Mary did that great video for us. You can see you put that change bucket in, you put that buffer in, and it's going to automatically move that line out, right? So the earlier you are and the more complex it is, the more of a buffer you're going to do, right? I live outside of Atlanta. If I'm going to go to the airport, and it's in the middle of the day, I'm going to plan for traffic. I'm going to see if there's something going on at the stadium. I'm definitely going to plan for, you know, blockages. It can easily go from, you know, 3 hours to 4 hours, just like that. So the more critical my deadline is, the more buffer I'm going to put in. That's just the fact that that's how we do it, right? And stakeholders don't like to hear that, but it's the reality. So you have to get pretty good about telling the story about what you're planning for, right? So when you do that as a product owner, one of the things you want to do is start talking about a range using what we call the cone of uncertainty. Instead of just identifying a deadline, really think this is just good old project management. What could those variances be? What would be the most likely, the least likely, and, you know, the worst possible? Because you as a product owner need to have an idea of where those trade-offs are going to be. Right? So if you're working with a deadline, you are going to be changing what? What are you going to be negotiating if you've got a deadline?
Requirements.
Scope. You're going to be negotiating, requirements. You're going to be doing less in order to meet a deadline. You're going to be asking, how much can I do in this time? If you have the time, but you have a fixed scope, right? You definitely want to look at that cone of uncertainty and see what that range would be. If you've got a fixed scope, because even more is unknown, right? You don't, in terms of all of the things that could happen. So we want you to start thinking and communicating in the cone of uncertainty using a range of deadline dates and really think. So you get in your tool, start using the epic, start adding in those change buckets, see what that looks like, right? There's also the whole idea of the persuasion and influencing the stakeholders, the people that are behind the deadlines, showing them, talking to them about the impacts. If you've got something big coming in, you can do the same exact math that Mary just showed you in your tool to put something in to show what that impact would be if you're using those epics, because you can use that version burn up chart to show that impact. It's very, very valuable when you start using the tool the way that it's designed. It's just elements that are going to require this consistent behavior practice. So I think I showed the change bucket already. Does anybody have any questions or adds on this? We can continue to talk about some things, but I just want to check in first on questions. Okay, well, let's check in on Peyton. Again, real life story. So she did the same. She started using the tool to burn up in order to track the items. Now, many of you might be using versions for fixed versions. That's totally fine. You can track things multiple ways. But we want you to start thinking about leveraging your tool so you have live data to make projections. Many teams might be using roadmap. That's still a little bit of a plan. It's not giving you live data about projections, but it still is good to see a Gantt chart. But if you can start using the version control or the epic burn up, that's going to give you an idea of the actual rate of velocity, the average law of averages. We use the law of averages with the velocity and start projecting it. But you have to add in your change bucket because you don't know what you don't know. You're not going to get an idea from your tool about how long things are going to take unless you put something in that starts to show that. So in our epic sizing, we did that at that very high level, 6-7 weeks before readout, because we wanted to see what capacity was at a high level, right? But now you're moving towards your backlogs. And now in order to get a chart like this in your tool, what might you have to do? You got to kind of game the system. What do you have to do in order for this chart, which runs off of product backlog items, to show when something might be done? Where does your change bucket live? This is running off of product backlog items, showing a rate of completion. That's what this blue thing is. Based on that rate of completion, you can see this red line, or these estimates are coming down. It's projecting months later. That's the likely release date given the current state of change. But if you've got a change bucket, where does it live? How does it show it? Any ideas?
Put it in your epic also.
Not in your epic, in your product backlog item. You've already accounted for it in your epic, right? But that's the epic. Now we're looking at release forecasting. If you're running a report off of product backlog items or user stories, you need a user story with a size on it. That's your change bucket.
And
because
are you putting it in the
Jira
last sprint?
You're putting
and just drawing down as you get closer and the uncertainty is less?
Yeah, you can just keep moving it. And every time you draw it down, you just keep moving it. This release chart is actually doesn't matter where it lives. But I think for myself in execution, I just put it in my sprint, right? Because I want to keep seeing it because I'm running it on my release plan. You can keep it in your product backlog because it's going to be tagged. All of these things are tagged with your version. So it doesn't matter whether it's in your backlog or whether it's in your sprint, you're tagging it against a version. So you can tag things multiple ways. You can tag things against an MVP, and you can tag them against a bigger release. So you might have something in your team that you're tagging to see if you can get it done, and then you might need to have it tagged again for something bigger that has multiple teams. So again, we're not dictating the how. We're showing you what the tool can do, and we're asking you to start to explore this. Again, we've been playing with these things for many months. We're exploring different tools and different charts, and that's where working with the Scrum Masters and the coaches and anybody who's in the tool and learning to use it can leverage different things that will help you identify how you can start to predict your dates using live data. That's the ask. Get better at predicting a likely target date using live data, but you've got to accommodate for the change because we don't have, in other agile tools, you put in a little formula. Here's my anticipated thing. Here's my change, but we don't have that, right? So we had to game the system with Jira and with VSTS. You have to put a product backlog item in there with a big change bucket on there. So you're addressing change in two different ways. When you're sizing the epic for that high level thing where you're saying, how much could I do in a quarter? You're going a little bit bigger because you're adding your change bucket there, yeah? If you're on the high end of small, you're probably going to be a medium. That's just your t-shirt sizes. But as you move along in refinement, now you're building out user story maps, you're building out your backlog, you got to put something in there where that change bucket is reflected in numbers.
Really, real quick question. So if you find, as you move along and you discover, oh, we missed this piece that we need to do, typically what we would do is build a new story and add it to the epic with, all the requirements around it for what that is. Is that acceptable? So we add the new story for it and then we subtract from the change bucket.
Exactly.
The amount. Okay, great.
Yes.
Okay.
So when you are working against a deadline or date, then you've got this bucket. You as a product owner have a definite bucket of points that you have to do trade-offs. So at some point, you're going to have to start saying what?
You can't. Yeah.
You can't do it.
I'm out of money. I'm out of points.
You're amount of money, amount of points, right? I know other things are going to come in. You might need to moderate it. Go ahead, Michael.
Oh, I was just going to ask from what Kim was saying, is that not you putting that change bucket in that epic?
No, your epic is a whole different container. Your epic is only going to show you at that high level, right? You're talking to all these teams. Your epic is just saying, I'm going from a medium to a large or a small to a medium. It's not a culmination of points below it at that point. You don't know. You haven't done the refinement. So the epic is early in planning to check capacity. But now you're tactical. Now you're in your planning. You're in your execution, and you want to see, am I going to meet my date? My team is 2 sprints in. I've got 6 sprints planned, to go. Am I going to make that date or not? So you're taking that conceptual t-shirt size, but now you're translating it into something tactical so that your tool will pick it up and give you what we call a Monte Carlo simulation. That's what's happening here behind the scenes. It's simulating, given the current velocity and everything that's in the system, when is your likely release? If you don't have a change bucket, it's not going to know that you're planning for that change. Your chart's going to look a lot different, right? Does that make sense? Meek, you're looking at me still confused, so let me know how I'm doing.
And no, I'm more, so when you say if we create a story, we put for the change bucket, put it in our PBI, and it's linked to that epic.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So you want everything should have a parent epic, sure.
Right. So doesn't that change bucket item or story come under the epic as the other stories that are also under that epic?
Yes, but that's a completely different view. That's just looking at all of the things that are linked to the epic.
Yeah,
right?
okay.
So that's going to show up in your epic burn downs. That's fine. This is a version burn down. But at some point, you got to, you're talking about change buckets at that high level when you're talking about planning so that you can check on your capacity, right? How many days, right? But now you're tactical. You're inside your, your refinement. You're adding things. You're taking things out. You have to constantly check as a product owner how I'm doing against the date with real data. This is live data. Paramita, question, comment?
Julie, yeah, I think something on this change bucket only. So just to get my understanding correct, so are we saying that in order to accommodate or basically just consider what is uncertain, so we are going to have some placeholder user stories within our epic and then put some kind of estimate to those as well? Is that what we are
Yes,
saying?
you only need one. You only need one thing that you're going to manage as a product owner. That's going to go down as you add more scope, because you're planning for change. You know change is going to happen, and you got to start with a number. Otherwise, what will your chart, if you don't have a change bucket, remember that little image that Mary showed us? What happens without a change bucket? What would this chart look like?
Yeah.
It would look very different, because the tool is only going to pick up the data that you put in it. It is the only way that Jira knows that it's got to accommodate that is to have something in there. So you either got to get your team in a room for days, breaking down every product backlog item, which is a lot of waste and effort because you don't know, or you put in basically a fake product backlog item with those units so that the tool will pick it up. It'll give you that forecast. And that's exactly what Peyton did. And you guys might not see this, but this is May of one year and this is May of another year. 1 year apart. That's a pretty powerful image, right? So true story. They still did not want to get off that date, but she kept at it. Eventually, they agreed that if they would check it again in 2 sprints, and if the data was still evident as they marched towards this, June deadline, then they would change the release date. And they did have to get very aggressive with the scope and with the releases. And they were able to do that. They made that first release much, much leaner so that they could get something in the hands of insurance agents. They added in some enhancements that they really wanted, but they added them in after they got that first thing out there with the insurance agents, because it went from quoting insurances for properties from 15 minutes to about 5 minutes. They were able to save 10 minutes on a call with consumers by just that first release. And then they were able to, in subsequent releases, add more enhancements, which got it down to 3 minutes. So this is a true story of using data to influence those stakeholders and how the tool can help you paint a picture of real live data using that law of averages, using the tools, using the change bucket that can help you with your conversation to set expectations. It can look it can look very different. Let me see if I can, I've got some examples in here. So this blue line, that's what's done. If you've got a lot of stuff that's unestimated, right, it's not going to pick it up. It's unestimated. That's why you have to have a backlog item in there that has an estimate on it. That's your change bucket. But given that you have that change bucket, it's going to give this progression with this cone of uncertainty. Here's another one. This one has long lead time. You can see that they've spent some time kind of getting stuff ready. This was more of a contractual period. So then they really started taking off with their development. So it definitely will still show that. In Jira, you need about 3 cycles of data for it to start to project. So the sooner that you can get in here and start practicing this, the better that it is. And it really relies on a pretty, on the law of averages with velocity and throughput. Whether you're using velocity or whether you're using throughput, that's what it's using to measure that rate of change. There's an algorithm inside Jira that's projecting how you're doing based on live data. So if your team is not closing their items, getting them in and then closing them, and you as the product owner are not closing them out, it's not going to pick them up as done. So there's some behaviors there that you also want to make sure happen, that you have nice, clean, closed items so that Jira picks them up as done. Does that make sense to people? So there's some behavior there, particularly for those of you who don't have Scrum Masters. You might need help, leaning in with your tech leads or other people to make sure that items are getting closed. If you're using sprints, the sprints are getting closed. You want your data hygiene to be very crisp in order for you have to have some confidence and accuracy in these charts. If it's giving you fits, try it out in Excel. It's a little, you have to do a dump, but there's many companies I worked at as a consultant that didn't have a good tool, and I had to pull things out into Excel. Sometimes it's easier to show things in Excel than in Jira because I didn't want my stakeholders getting into the nitty gritty. So dump it out into Excel. You can show, anomalies or points. You don't have to do this all the time, but I've been in many situations where I was working with, we call the HIPPOs, the highest paid people's opinions in the rooms, and I needed the visual. In this instance, that that orange line was that ideal state. That's where the SOW was written. If you look at this chart and that knowing that that orange light was the plan, that was the contract, what can you see immediately what the disparity is? The red is the total, the remaining. The gray is the actual, trend line.
Added scope.
Yeah, they wrote a contract that didn't even match the scope in the beginning. Like there was a complete disconnect between the sales department who wrote the contract and the delivery department who was, gathering all the requirements. So a big gap. And I would tell you at this point in time, it was $1 million gap. I had to go negotiate for $1 million. And like Peyton, I'm not Peyton, but like Peyton, this chart bought me $1 million. That's a true story. It took 10 minutes of discussing this visual to get $1 million in that contract because it was evident, it was from live data, they can go check the data, it was evident how far off those expectations are. So, you don't need a lot of persuasion skills, but you do need to, use the data, know how it works. I really suggest you start really simple and you start with what you know, and then you go from there. So let's move towards our recap here, just kind of closing out on our mural. You'll be able to access mural, obviously, but just kind of closing up our conversation. And it's just the beginning to more. We don't know what you need. Some of you are talking about things that you are already doing, so that's great. But we're here for you. So we want you to start playing with these things, start trying with these things. I think somebody already put a meeting on our calendar. And again, there's no deadline. Nobody's saying do this by the end of the year, do this by first quarter, but we want you to start. And we specifically want you to start with the new things so that you can at least look back over the 2024 period and you can start showing those epics, and they can report up into Jeff and Brian. We want to see that moving. We know that first quarter at least is going to be pretty iffy because you've probably got a lot of things that are already in play. You don't need to make this disruptive. You can make a planned approach to it. All right. So we will absolutely work with you. All right. So let's check in. Why do we need these things? Go ahead and drop a couple things. Let's see how we're doing on our objectives. Whoever's typing that, raise any red flags early on. Absolutely. Make informed decisions. Nice. Balance our resources. Great. It's very much about, as a product owner, you're always managing scope and expectations, right? So the tool will help you if we can start using it the same across teams. When do you do these things? Nice, yeah. You're just preparing, right? You're putting in those change buckets. You're taking that epic conversation. You're relating it now down into a change bucket. You're getting those elements in place. You're talking to people about their behavior. So you're getting all those things in place, and then you keep adjusting it throughout delivery. You got to constantly check in on it. And we do this on a known thing. We do this when we're in delivery. So typically, the event that I use as a product owner is in my backlog refinement. Every time we were going to backlog refinement, I'm going back to my release plan. I'm making those adjustments, right? Because that's where I'm adding in scope. I'm refining, the team's refining the sizes. I'm getting a more realistic picture. And I would typically have a couple of refinement sessions, one for that preview. So one in my sprint was looking 2 to 3 sprints ahead, probably at epic and feature level, letting the team know what's coming and expectations. And one was at the product backlog item level where they are sizing and putting in acceptance criteria. So if I'm doing great, my team is really ahead of the game, and I needed to drop one because they needed to put heads down, I can drop my preview. If I'm 2 to 3 sprints ahead, I can drop that preview, right? And still have my refinement that's a couple days before the sprint. I like refinement a couple days before the sprint because there's going to be more things that show up. Remember those dependencies, it's just an epidemic. You're gonna do everything you can to proactively mitigate them, but you're not going to get rid of them all. And I want a couple days before my sprint in case there's more dependencies that cropped up that I wasn't aware of. So it's this 3-touch system, right? The big view, the release planning, the preview, the couple of sprints ahead, and then the now view, that sprint planning that gives your team that ability to refine and refine and refine. You want to check in the portfolio Kanban. They're meeting weekly, and that's giving them a conversation in that area where they can adjust expectations weekly. All right, what are the big changes that you need? What are the major data points or elements that you need for release forecasting? When we're talking about requirements, what kind of requirements are we talking about? Do you need a lot of requirements? What does high level mean? Whoever types high level.
Yeah, Julie. So I think with high level, I would mean that at least we should have an idea of, I mean, what we need to deliver. We may not have the 100% or the granular level of details, but at least we should know that. So if I'm working on an epic, so what are the basic requirements that needs to be covered and developed?
Yes.
And requirements can mean technology as well as the business requirements.
Nice. Yeah, perfect. And that's what we want to see in that epic workshop, right? We want you to complete that epic together. You as a product owner can certainly go as far as you want. But if you are working with solution leads or UX, you're going to need those people in the room to help refine that business case and put that, all those things together. So certainly do as much as you can, but you want that group wisdom of the crowd, that group wisdom to come in and make sure, particularly when you're talking about that change bucket, you really need to understand those complexities. So that's the point of working with that epic canvas, is you're getting that alignment at the high level, but you're not trying to get into, product backlog items, kind of draw a line. So you keep your strategic people thinking strategically. We love to solution. It's very easy to get down into the deliverables, but I would save those for other conversations like impact mapping and user story mapping. All right, this depends on a lot of human behaviors. What are some of them? And there's a lot of human behaviors that have to change, and from a lot of different people. So what do you think? How impactful is this when we think about the humans involved? Better understanding of something when something may get delivered. Yeah, some of it's a language change, right? Versus giving a date, start talking about the cone of uncertainty, use that conversation about what you don't know, right? The things that you don't know, the technology complexity or the unknown requirements, because you don't have big, long requirement documents. Maybe you have a new team. We typically think in terms of unknowns around people, requirements, or technology. Some of those you can close. You can run a spike and make decisions about technology. You can run, impact mapping and make more decisions about requirements. You can do some teaming to get more confidence around your teaming. Maybe do, small little code reviews or exercises if you have a lot of complexities around your team. Maybe it's just knowledge about the product if they're new. So there's things that you can do as a product owner to close those gaps when you think about those complexities. But that change bucket will definitely allow you to manage your scope, to manage know what trade-offs you have to make in order to meet those deadlines. So you can welcome change, right? In fact, dare I say, you can excel at welcoming change and you can still meet your deadlines. All right, last thing, your get out of the workshop, just go ahead and spend a minute, if you will, add in the things that you can do leaving here, the things that you don't need permission approval from others, other things that you might need. Reach out, just drop something on my calendar. I'll probably bring some of the coaches along with me, depending on who's best positioned to coach you. Ranjith and Vinoy in India are prepared to help coach this as well. All of our Scrum Masters and coaches in the US and India have had some time this year to work through these. Again, when it comes to your specific problem, it's not going to be a cut and paste. We want to work with you, right? We want to understand, but we're trying to be really lean about what we centralize. And that epic conversation is very critical because that's where those reports come from. We have a lot more to show you. One of the ways we can show you that is through the community of practice. And what's coming up is a couple of really interesting conversations in the community of practice about predictable delivery. If you missed the last one with Daniel Vacani's group, the Kanban group, really fantastic community of practice. Like the other resources, everything now is on our SharePoint. And you can come into our SharePoint. There's so many user guides and job aids over here. There's decks here. Lots of resources if you learn that way. If you like to learn by reading, these job aids are usually 1 to 2 pages. But you can also come into our community of practice. And you can come back here. We're really moving towards doing more with predictable delivery, leveraging AI. And our new one in November, if you haven't signed up for it, is still on that same sort of vein, predictable delivery. We manage our community of practice through teams. So if you are not part of our community of practice, we encourage everyone to come when you can and at least get connected, so that you can join in and at least listen to the recordings. Let me bring you the channel link. And I think that's the last thing I have for you today. I know this was a lot, so thanks for hanging in there with me. And I'll hang out if anybody has any questions.
Thanks, Julie.
Yeah, welcome.